Well, that is the purpose of elections. And at the last election, this government achieved a sizable majority for our missions, including to grow the economy, to improve living standards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got a question for the Chancellor, which is, I see that the taxpayer is now accountable to the state. The state.
If you've ever felt let down by a politician's empty promises, you're not alone. Today, we're going to explore how Andrew Neil channeled the frustrations of millions of Britons in his interview with Rachel Reeves. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great! Thank you so much. Now back to the video. As we dissect this pivotal moment, ask yourself, how many times have you heard grand plans for economic recovery?
And I'd like to know what the Chancellor is going to do to ensure that government is as accountable to the taxpayer as the taxpayer is to government.
And make working people better off. We've just got started, and that is what we are absolutely determined to do, to deliver on the mandate that we got on the 4th of July.
It's not accountable to the taxpayer. And I think a lot of the root causes of our growth come from the fact that many of our offices run by the state are not working, and they're actually strangling our economy.
Only to be left with a heavier tax burden. This video might just change how you view political promises forever. Rachel Reeves's dramatic announcement of a $22 billion black hole in public finances has sent shockwaves through Westminster. But as Andrew Neil pointed out in his fiery interview, this fiscal revelation isn't quite the surprise Reeves would have us believe. The Institute for Fiscal Studies had been sounding the alarm bells long before Labour took office. Their economists warned during the election that future fiscal sums simply didn't add up, estimating a shortfall of around $20 billion. The Office for Budget Responsibility echoed these concerns, indicating that some future funding projections were on shaky ground. Yet Reeves claimed to have uncovered this financial chasm only after stepping into her role as Chancellor. Neil didn't pull any punches when dissecting Reeves's announcement. He highlighted how the debt markets had already reacted negatively, suggesting that her budget would lead to tens of billions in additional borrowing. This flies in the face of Reeves's assurances of fiscal responsibility. Neil's critique went further, predicting that under her policies, the economy would remain largely unchanged in 5 years, a grim outlook for the UK's economic future. But the contradictions don't stop there. Neil exposed how Reeves's budget included a staggering $40 billion tax hike through increased employers' national insurance contributions and capital gains tax. He described this as a dagger to care homes and small businesses, potentially adding nearly $800 to the cost of employing someone full-time on minimum wage. This raises serious questions about Labour's commitment to working families and businesses. Paul Johnson of the Institute for Fiscal Studies dealt another blow to Reeves's credibility. He stated that the state of public finances was apparent pre-election to anyone who cared to look. This begs the question, what motivated this sudden discovery by Reeves? Was it genuine surprise or a calculated political move? As the dust settles on this fiscal furor, it's clear that Labour's economic credibility has taken a hit. The disconnect between their pre-election promises and post-election policies is stark. This black hole narrative, far from demonstrating Labour's financial acumen, has instead exposed a troubling gap between their words and actions. As the public digests these revelations, Labour may find themselves facing a crisis of trust that could have far-reaching implications for their economic agenda and political future. While Labour scrambles to explain away their fiscal fumble, a more insidious problem lurks beneath the surface. What if their entire economic platform was built on quicksand? Let's peel back the layers of Labour's campaign promises and see how they stack up against their actions in power. During the election, Labour made grand promises to protect working families, ensure no rise in national insurance, and boost the national living wage. These commitments resonated with voters struggling to make ends meet. But as Andrew Neil's probing interview revealed, the reality of Labour's economic policies tells a very different story. Take, for example, the winter fuel payment cuts for pensioners. This decision directly contradicts Labour's pledge to support vulnerable demographics. Critics argue that many pensioners are now left struggling during a harsh winter. Their trust in Labour's promises shattered. It's a stark reminder of how quickly political rhetoric can crumble when faced with the realities of governance. But the betrayal doesn't stop there. The national insurance hike has sent shockwaves through various sectors, particularly hitting care homes hard. Staff are facing increased costs due to the cut in the tax threshold from $9,100 to $5,000, significantly impacting their take-home pay. This change is expected to add a staggering $2.4 billion to annual Labour costs for adult social care providers. How can Labour reconcile this with their promise to protect working families? The Institute for Fiscal Studies has sounded the alarm, warning that the national insurance increase will add nearly $800 to the cost of employing someone full-time on the minimum wage. This places an enormous strain on businesses already grappling with inflation. It's a far cry from Labour's pre-election rhetoric of supporting small businesses and fostering economic growth. Labour's silence on these glaring contradictions between their promises and policies is deafening. As public trust erodes, many are left wondering, how can a party that pledged to be the champion of working families justify decisions that seem to do the exact opposite? The introduction of inheritance tax on agricultural land has sparked outrage among farmers, further complicating Labour's relationship with the electorate. Many in rural communities feel that Labour's policies are completely out of touch with the realities of their lives. This growing disconnect between Labour's words and actions is creating a crisis of trust that could have far-reaching implications for the UK's political and economic landscape. As we look towards the future, one thing is clear. The coming months will test not just Labour's policies, but the very foundations of public faith in government. With each broken promise and policy U-turn, the gap between political rhetoric and reality widens, leaving voters to grapple with the consequences of their choices at the ballot box. As the dust settles on Labour's economic revelations, the implications stretch far beyond mere figures on a spreadsheet. The UK finds itself at a critical crossroads, with public trust in government hanging by a thread. Labour's contradictory actions, from pension cuts to national insurance hikes, have left many questioning the party's commitment to its pre-election promises. The coming months will be a litmus test for Labour's economic policies and the very foundations of democratic governance. As living standards potentially decline and frustration mounts, the government faces an uphill battle to regain credibility. The gap between political rhetoric and reality continues to widen, leaving voters grappling with the consequences of their electoral choices. This crisis of trust isn't just a Labour problem, it's symptomatic of a broader issue in UK politics. As the public's faith in government erodes, the country faces uncertain times ahead. The question remains, can Labour bridge the chasm between promises and actions, or will this economic tightrope act lead to a political fall from grace?